Escape from New York, a novel by Mike McQuay, based upon a screenplay by John Carpenter and Nick Castle. Chapter 4, Manhattan Island, October the 23rd, 7:45 p.m. The inside of the van was dark like a cave. It was all steel inside, cold and slick. It was going to rain. Plissken could feel it in his eye, but Herc couldn't tell otherwise, for he was completely closed in. No light, no warmth, and only the air that had been locked in there with him. They had been riding for a long time, and the suspension on the truck was so bad that Plissken was bruised all over from the Holtz. He would have slept, since he needed the rest, but the continual bouncing plus the heavy chains they had manacled him down with made it impossible. They had taken him out of the San Francisco station, just leaving Taylor's body there, for whatever the fates had in store for it. They never talked to him, except for the occasional exclamation of a rifle butt across his back or head. But it didn't matter. He knew what was in store for him. They put him on a Hummer, and he traveled, coach this time, all the way back to New Jersey. Then they put him in the back of the truck and started driving. Nobody wanted him any longer than they had to have him, for Snake Plissken had a reputation of being slippery. It would have been a lot easier to simply kill him the way they did Taylor, but catching the most wanted criminal in the country alive was a miracle to everyone concerned. They were extremely happy to have Snake, but only for a little while. There was no trial, of course. Trials had gone out with the United States Police Force. With so much crime and so little money, the country simply didn't have the machinery or inclination to deal with a legal system. The black bellies were the legal system. Judge, jury, and in more cases than not, executioner. They were sending him to New York. He knew it as soon as they punched up the coordinates to New Jersey way out in San Francisco. The van stopped moving. He got slowly to his feet, having to work around the chains that ran from his wrists down to his ankles. The ceiling of the truck was lower than his height, so he was forced to stoop. He moved close to the door, ready to kick out and make a bid for freedom if the opportunity arose. He heard voices outside, but the walls of the van made it impossible to tell what they were saying. Then the door came open. There were guards, and they all had rifles. All of the rifles pointing at him. "Have you heard the one about the traveling salesman?" he asked, and then they were pulling him through the opening to fall on the hard ground. He went down, the fall knocking the wind out of him. Rolling onto his back, he was staring up at black night clouds. A helicopter was passing by just overhead. It feathered down on a landing pad not 100 feet from him. The black bellies pulled him to his feet and led him towards the bunkers set into the Great Wall. Behind him stood the statue, grim and massive, pulling silent sentry duty over the fortress of New York, her search beams stinging the night in long, melancholy streamers. The bunkers were blank and unimaginative, and stretched out the entire length of the wall. Radar scanners revolved slowly on their roofs. Plissken was taken towards the door. Above it, a sign read, "Liberty Island Security Control." They shoved him through a door to stand in a long hallway. There were more signs on the walls, huge signs. "Prisoners, no talking, no smoking, follow the red line." The red line was painted, none too neatly, right onto the floor. "Go on," a voice behind him barked. Then he was shoved from the back. He followed the red line, hoping that it would take him to the pot of gold. He ended up at a guard station. A duty sergeant with a flabby face and 2 fleshy cracks for eyes looked up at him. "Hold up," the sergeant said, his eyes drifting down to the clutter on his desk. Plissken stopped walking, a look of disgust on his face. He was in the midst of a black belly heaven, and it made him feel dirty. The duty sergeant was idly flipping through a tack of manila folders, his mouth moving wordlessly. Then he found what he wanted and stopped. "Mr. Snake Plissken," he said without inflection. The other guards suddenly came awake, eyes wide, staring at Plissken. They took the safety catches off their rifles and held them a little tighter, a little steadier. Snake shook his head. He wasn't going anywhere, at least not right away. "How are you tonight, Plissken?" the man with the folder asked. "Fabulous," Plissken responded, and his words were as dead as Bill Taylor. The man smiled, showing rotted teeth. "Not for long," he purred. A gun was jammed into Plissken's back, pushing him on down the hall. He shuffled on, his chains chinking along the stone floor as he moved. He was heading toward a doorway. It was the kind of doorway that could lead straight to hell. There was a sign above the doorway, neatly stenciled in blood-red letters. It read, "Goodbye, Charlie. Don't think it hasn't been fun." He hesitated for only a second before they shoved him into the blackness within. Hawk had never met Snake Plissken, but he knew about him. He had been Lieutenant Plissken then. Names changed to fit circumstances. Hawk had been Big Bob then, and sometimes Colonel Hawk. He shared a heritage with Plissken. It was a heritage called Leningrad. When Plissken's men were storming the city that cold, ugly sunrise, Hawk had been leading a squadron of slant wings on the eastern industrial section of town. They were drawing fire. And they drew one hell of a lot. They drew enough fire to burn up the world. Hawk wore a tiny gold earring in his right ear. In another century, sailors used to get earrings like his to show that they had survived a shipwreck. That's what Colonel Big Bob Hawk thought about Leningrad, and he wanted to meet Plissken just once. Wanted to tell him that he understood. The copter touched down, and he watched some guards leading a chained man past him to the holding area. He started to follow the figure with his eyes, but something else caught his attention. Someone was running towards him. It was the section commander, Raime. He climbed out of the chopper without a word to the pilot. He was wearing his dark suit and tie, which fit his mood. His nickel-plated .38 with the pearl handle rode snugly on his hip. He never came to New York without a gun. Never. He bent down under the bite of the props. The machine generated wind whipping his face and hair. Raime ran right up to him and began talking. He couldn't hear a word the man was saying above the roar of the fake wind. He waved his hand and pointed to his ear. Raime nodded, and they trotted away from the copter, which took off again as soon as they were clear. Charlie was anxious to get back up there. He had a gold badge to earn. "What is it?" Hank asked as soon as the noise died down. Raime was painting, out of breath. His blue serge suit fit him like it was a hand-me-down from a gorilla. "We have a small jet in trouble, sir," he said between gulps of air. "Over-restricted airspace." Hawk looked at him. "Did you say a jet?" The man nodded. "Where is he?" Raime's eyes drifted skyward as if he was looking for the plane. "About 7 miles and closing." They had reached the air traffic control bunker. Raime hurried inside. Hawk started to follow, then stopped for a second. He looked up the way Raime had done, then followed the man through the doorway. The doorway opened to stairs. The steps down were steep and poorly lit. Raime was in the lead. "We can't reach him," he said over his shoulder. There was one transmission about 10 minutes ago. He identified as David 14, and then all of a sudden, he was cut off. You can't raise him? Hawk asked. Not a word. The stairs terminated in the air traffic bunker. The room was softly lit, mostly from the bluish-green flow of all the instruments that filled the four walls, floor to ceiling. Hawk didn't need to ask to know where the commotion was. A group of controllers was huddled around a single radar screen. He moved up on them and looked over some shoulders. A small blip was moving across the gridded field. One man sat at a console. He was speaking into a microphone. David 14, do you copy? Over. Ramo walked up next to Hawk, his face grim. Hawk knew that he was wondering why this had to happen on his shift. There was an answering voice on the small speaker, but it was so distorted that it was incomprehensible. The man with the microphone spoke again. David 14, I'm calling air rescue. Please turn to band 749 and stand by. He turned weary eyes to Hawk and Ramey. Still no reply, he said, shaking his head. Ramey nodded and pointed to a switch on the console. The man turned and flipped it. Bayon, I have a mayday in restricted space. The radio crackled back immediately. New York, I have him, the tinny voice replied. 13 east. He's losing altitude fast. Hawk turned and stared at Ramey. Who is he? I don't know, Ramey answered in clipped tones. That wasn't good enough. You have the code. The man pursed his lips and took a breath. Everyone had turned to stare at him. There's no David 14 on the computer, he said softly. Unlisted. Ramey was nervous now, visibly shaken. He ran a hand across his leathery face. It's an unregistered code. We had to call Washington. Hawk just started at the man. That plane could be anything, and it was coming down right in their laps. He didn't want to make decisions like this. Didn't ever want to make them. There were several beats of silence. Then the radio crackled, making them all jump. A voice was coming up. A voice jumbled with static. The controller adjusted his tuner. I think I got him, sir, he said. Then the voice was there, and Hawk wished that it wasn't. And it's too late, assholes. All your imperialist weapons and lies can't save him now. We're going down. The voice drowned in static again. Hawk felt his insides tightening, stomach churning. The controller was back on the mic, frantic. David 14, do you copy? Do you copy, David 14? A man called from across the room, from the computer bank. Code's coming in, sir, he called, and his voice had the same knife edge to it as the controller's. Hawk and Ramey moved quickly to the computer, the controller's voice jangling their ears. They got down close to the screen and watched the typer print it out. Aircraft ident. Code, David 14. Decode, Air Force. 1. At that exact instant, Bob Houck wished that he had died in Leningrad.